When Ororon came out, I really wanted to do a 101 on him, but I just felt it was irresponsible to do it on his first banner. So I prayed and prayed and prayed that he would rerun soon. And, I mean, I guess my prayers got answered. Yay, yippee, woo, Ororon's a free unit! In all honesty, I really preferred this over him being on another banner, because even though you can't get multiple copies, Ororon, like most units in the game, his most impactful constellation is his C0. So let's just get into talking about my favorite unit from Natlan and look at his kit. And lucky me, none of his levelable talents are very important to his kit. Starting with the least useful, his normal attacks. They basically do nothing. Of course, he has the ability to apply Electro anytime he wants through his charged attack, but unless you're trying to do specific setups, that isn't often useful. For his skill, he simply throws this ball that deals a nice chunk of damage and will bounce between nearby enemies. At base, it can hit 3 enemies, but C1 increases that to 5. And finally, for his burst, he gets a big hit of initial Electro damage before creating this thing, eyeball, whatever. It rotates and deals small instances of damage while applying Electro and taunting enemies. Has a 9-second duration and is on a 15-second cooldown. The most notable aspect is that it has a special ICD. It will only apply Electro to opponents every 3 seconds. So if none of his talents really do anything, where is his kit? Ororon is almost entirely defined by his Ascension 1 passive, Nightshade Synesthesia. This is where the majority of his damage is found and all of his Night Soul mechanics. He essentially has 2 different modes of play, but both get the same result. He'll enter the Night Soul state and trigger this lightning strike on up to 4 nearby enemies. That lightning bolt has a scaling of 160% attack and has a cooldown of 1.8 seconds. So what's with the 2 modes? He has a maximum of 80 Night Soul points, and he has 2 different ways of gaining Night Soul and 2 different ways of triggering this lightning bolt, which costs 10 Night Soul. His first mode is essentially his Natlan mode. He gains 40 Night Soul points whenever a Night Soul burst is triggered, which is this white flashing effect around your screen. Triggers whenever anyone on your party deals elemental damage, and its cooldown goes down with more Natlan units in your party. He will then spend these points and do this lightning strike whenever another character deals Night Soul aligned damage, which is basically any elemental damage dealt by a Natlan unit. The only things that aren't counted are normal and charged attacks on catalyst units and aimed shots on bow units. So the more Natlan units you have in your party, the more consistently you can trigger Night Soul Burst and keep his Night Soul points high. And if these units are using Night Soul aligned damage, he can trigger his lightning bolts more consistently. His second mode is Electrocharge. After he uses his skill, he grants himself a little buff for 15 seconds, which is the same as its cooldown, so easy enough to remember. Whenever other party members deal Hydro or Electro damage, he'll gain 5 Night Soul. Of course, this is mostly going to be found in the form of having other Hydro and Electro units in your party, but it also triggers off of things like Animo units doing Hydro and Electro swirls. In those teams, his Lightning Bolt is triggered by enemies taking Electrocharge damage. So, build up his Night Soul by having Hydro and Electro teammates hit enemies, and spend his Night Soul by having Hydro and Electro teammates hit enemies and trigger reactions. And then his second passive talent, very simple. After using his skill, he'll gain a buff, also lasts 15 seconds. Again, same as the cooldown. When he's off field and your character hits with normal charged or plunging attacks, he'll grant 3 energy to them and 3 energy to himself, up to 3 times for a total of 9 energy. Now that's his whole kit, but there are a few things that I would like to talk about regarding his Ascension 1 passive. This working in the way that it does makes Ororon an incredibly accessible character for 2 reasons. Number 1, the majority of his damage is coming from a passive talent that doesn't need to be leveled. So if you're stretched for resources, you can leave him at 1/1/1 talents and he'll still be effective. And number 2, while it sounds very, very complicated, when you actually play Ororon, you'll find that this essentially all happens automatically. His Electrocharge style can be a little finicky because it requires opponents to take Electrocharge damage, so you need to be triggering Electrocharge. Usually this means that he can't be the only Electro unit in the team, seeing as his only source of off-field Electro is his burst, which only lasts 9 seconds. But as long as you meet that requirement, he pretty much plays himself, and when using the natlan variant, he does play himself. If you don't want to, you never have to swap to Ororon in natlan teams. I mean, you should, because his skill and burst do deal some damage, not the majority, but some, but you don't have to. The one finicky thing about this talent is, of course, that his Night Soul's Blessing is tied to it, which basically mean that the lightning strikes that he does have to be the things that are triggering the reaction if you want to get the full effect of Scroll of Cinder City. But like I said, you're usually triggering them automatically, so this is only an issue in a few teams that want to do specific setups. And actually, a second finicky thing that's related to that, these lightning bolts share ICD with his skill. Meaning, if his skill applies Electro, which it does on hit, if these lightning bolts hit the same enemy within 2.5 seconds, they won't apply Electro. We'll see here, I'm gonna hit him with the skill to apply Electro once and use PyroMC's hold skill to remove the Electro aura and trigger the lightning bolts. The initial hit of the skill applies Electro, but the lightning bolt doesn't. So if you're not keeping that in mind, it can cause some problems with your setups. Enough about base kit, let's look at his constellations. Both C1 and C2 are fairly significant personal damage increases. As mentioned, C1 allows his skill to bounce between more opponents, and it also applies a debuff that will make them take more damage from his lightning strikes. C2 is an electro damage bonus when he uses his burst, 8% at base, but it will gain an additional 8% for every opponent it hits, so usually that means at minimum 16, and it maxes out at 40. C3 has burst levels, it's fine. His burst is his second largest source of damage, so it's fine, but nothing really special. C4 is an energy refund, and it makes his burst rotate faster. As mentioned, he has a special ICD, so this won't affect his rate of application, but it does affect the follow-up sound wave damage. C5 is useless. I mean, it's not useless, but it's close to it. His skill is easily his lowest source of damage. And C6 looks a lot better than it is. Don't get me wrong, it still is good, but it's nothing crazy. It's an attack buff to your on-fielder, 10% every time his lightning bolts are triggered, maxes out at 30, and he also triggers some extra lightning bolts that deal double the original damage when using his burst. So it's an okay buff and an okay damage increase. Fairly strong constellations overall, but none of them are really anything special. And let's talk about the elephant in the room, fischl. They both have the same role of off-field electro damage dealer. While they are similar, I find that their strengths don't exactly overlap, and I usually have a clear choice of which I would rather use in any given team. Fischl is generally going to beat out Ororon on a raw DPS scale, but of course Ororon's ability to activate 4-piece scroll makes his buffing capabilities a lot higher, and he also can potentially deal more damage than fischl. Something I kind of skipped over was that his lightning bolts can target up to 4 nearby opponents, so while his single target damage just isn't all that special, it's his AoE potential that really makes him stand out. This AoE aspect of his kit makes it so that in AoE scenarios, he can actually end up dealing more damage than fischl. Hoyo doesn't really like a lot of AoE scenarios, so it's pretty rare that this will happen, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. And there is also the fact that they're both off-fielders. You don't have to choose. You can just play them both. Ororon and fischl actually have fairly strong synergy with each other. Fischl being more single target and Ororon being more AoE focused makes them cover each other's weaknesses. And of course, scroll buffs fischl. On that note, let's look at his gear. And Scroll is kind of your only option. Noblesse is functional as a buffing set if you already have a scroll user on your team, but unlike other sub DPSs that like using Noblesse, he doesn't get the majority of his damage from his burst. So the 2-piece effect, it's not useless, but it's not great. I think I should mention Tenacity, specifically because it's bad. It doesn't work on him, his lightning bolts aren't skill damage, but I've seen people use Tenacity Ororon, so just trying to dispel that myth. Artifact recommendations are kind of whack. I'm okay with it because the percentages are so low, but as mentioned, he doesn't do a lot of burst damage, so 4-piece emblem is on him, and his energy requirements are usually low enough that you don't want to be building a ton of energy recharge. Codex needs to be on field to work, and for the most part, his kit states that other units need to be dealing the damage and triggering the reactions and whatnot. So for your regular Ororon, it's not going to do anything at all. Gilded Dreams is another functional set. It's just a ton of attack and EM, and those are both stats that he can make good use of. Scales off attack, triggers some Electrocharges. He's having a good time. But for the most part, Scroll is his only option. 2-piece makes his energy requirements even lower than they already are, and 4-piece not only turns him into a buffer, but it buffs himself. This is a 40% damage percent increase to your Ororon as much as it is to the rest of your team. And I guess you could use Thundering Fury for the electro damage bonus and the reaction buff, but the cooldown reduction doesn't work off field. Not that you would really want it, but yeah, just use Scroll. For my gear in particular, I keep him on an ER Sands, attack percent Goblet, and a crit rate Circlet. Electro damage bonus works perfectly fine, but just with my build, with my setup, I'm not getting a lot of attack percent on him, and I am getting a fair amount of damage percent, so this is what I'm going with. My weapon is Aqua. I also have C2, so between the constellations and the weapon, my damage is going to be on the higher side. Fav is always good. It's Fav. Other 5-star stat 6 work just fine. His best is probably Elegy at the end. I like speccing into his damage just because I like seeing a lot of damage out of Ororon, but realistically, the buffing potential that Elegy provides will be better for the rest of your team than his own personal damage, because while his damage is good, it's not crazy, and you're not losing a ton by not having a perfectly built Ororon. The team section is going to be formatted a little weird because, as I mentioned, he has 2 playstyles, Natlan and Electrocharge. Of course, this is my channel, so we're going to look at Electrocharge first. And as always, Electrocharge is an incredibly flexible archetype. The only thing that I would consider a requirement for Electrocharge is a Res Shredder, and even that is optional. As I mentioned before, you usually want to have a second Electro so you can trigger more Electrocharges and Ororon can activate more Lightning Strikes, but even that is optional, especially if you have a team with a shorter rotation. This is a very traditional Electrocharge team. It's a Sucrose Taser, 3 off-fielders dealing good damage, while one of them buffs everybody, and 1 on-fielder shredding res. It's certainly not as strong as it used to be. Electrocharge hasn't scaled all that well as the HP numbers in Abyss have started going up, but it is a very comfy and easy to play team while having a reasonable ceiling. I'm not going to spend too long on it. Pretty simple to understand. Just an old favorite of mine, and another chance for me to point out that Ororon was a pretty decent buff to Beto. They're both AoE focused units. He reduces her energy requirements. He of course has Cinder City. I just like using them together, and if anybody else wanted an excuse to use their Beto, this is it. But you can really go anywhere with this. Of course, Yelan can be a damage upgrade, but I like Xingqiu here because of his defense. The other strong option for a Hydro off-fielder is Farina. She, of course, necessitates that you bring a healer, but lucky, what do we have right here? Standard banner Animo unit that does full party healing. Of course, there are a few other options, like Sayu, and I don't have her, but the dreaded Mizuki, and of course, Chilonin. Not an Animo unit, so she's not getting damage off of triggering Electrocharges, and her healing is single target, but because Res Shred is in her base kit, she has some freedom with artifacts. Throw her on Instructor, she becomes an EM buffer. Not the best, not the worst, but if you have her and you want to use her, she's fine. And like, Shanyun's also there. Hiei Miko Plunge could potentially be somewhat compelling in Electrocharge. I don't have her, so the best I could do is Lisa. And of course, there's the option of using your Hydro slot as your on-fielder. Child would technically function, not particularly synergistic, and his cooldowns could be kind of odd, but it works. If you really want to use your Ayato works. You could keep Farina and then do something like Kokomi, use her, or Barbara as your on-fielder. But doing something like this, you are going to have to give up your Res Shred slot or your second Electro. I would usually recommend giving up the second Electro because, as mentioned, Ororon's damage is good, not crazy. It's much better to increase your Hydro unit's damage than it is to guarantee Ororon gets as many Electrocharges as he wants to trigger all of his lightning bolts. Although if you're using an Animo unit that can infuse, you do have the second wacky option of using them as your second Electro. It will be inconsistent and pretty difficult, but you can do it if you're insane. And of course there's the nuclear bomb in the room. You can always use Nuvolette. Ororon can buff him while dealing some significant personal damage himself. And of course on the flip side, you can use Electro on-fielders, which will make your Electrocharges a lot more consistent. Raiden, Keqing, and of course Clorand, all great options. I've shown off a few Sethos teams in the past. I really do love Sethos Electrocharge. Even Sora works as a weird quick swap option if you're that insane like I am. Lisa as well, you could just use her straight out, no plunge involved. Let's get you out here so I don't have to think about Farina anymore. You get the point. There are so many things you can do with Electrocharge, and Ororon fits well into all of them. He has a few things that he likes out of Electrocharge teams, but they're not requirements. Electrocharge teams do significant talent damage, and his ability to buff them is nothing to be ignored. And of course, the next type of team is a natlan team. This is one I am not going to be able to speak nearly as much on, simply because the only natlan carry I have is Kanich. Ororon works fine in Kanich teams. He can buff Dendro damage, but him overloading and interrupting the burning aura makes it so that most of the time, if you have her, you'd just rather use iansan. She can get the Dendro scroll buff without doing any off-field Electro application, so Kanich and Emily will have uninterrupted burning up time. Just pretend this is Chaska. He does have fairly strong synergy in Chaska teams, provides her with an Electro Bullet, can pretty consistently buff all the types of damage she's doing, and does some decent personal damage of his own. Maoika teams are less good. If you're doing a Maoika team, you're probably going to want to go in the direction of Overload, and in that case, again, you would probably just want to go iansan because of Maoika's insane, ridiculous, stupid personal damage. Buffing her more is going to be better than using an off-field damage dealer like Ororon, but he's certainly usable. Nearly the same can be said of Varesa. You also might have a harder time getting your 40% damage buff because an Electro unit is dealing the Night Soul line damage. It's possible that she is going to trigger the overload and leave it so that Ororon doesn't have a Pyro Aura to react off of. Easier in something like an Aggravate team, and that works well enough, but Varesa's multipliers are tuned towards mostly Overload or other hypercarry teams like Farina Shanyun. Chaska is the only one I would really recommend. In the rest of the natlan carry teams, he's fine, he's usable, nothing special. I don't have any of these carries, I only have Kanich, so where do I use Ororon? There is one archetype that I have talked about a reasonable amount in the past, and it actually just got a minor buff. Overload with Pyro MC. Pyro MC just got their real C6, not the fake story C6, infuses their normal charge and plunging attacks and gives those attacks 40% crit damage. These attacks are also Night Soul aligned. That part isn't really all that important because their skill also deals Night Soul aligned damage and would be triggering Ororon's lightning bolts anyways, but it does give these teams a better option for an on-fielder, and it gives Ororon just that tiny extra bit of consistency when triggering his bolts. And I could use Bennett instead of iansan here, but I don't want to. Really nothing special. but it's a silly team that I like to play. But I think that's it. Not nearly as much team showcasing in this one, because once you learn how he works, Ororon is a pretty simple character. He plays the same in pretty much all these teams. But I hope you learned something. Especially, I hope you learned how flexible Ororon is. Even if he's not usually a best in slot option, he is a strong unit by nature of him being good in so many different teams. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can drop a like or subscribe if you're not. Drop any questions in the comments. I will do my best to answer them, and I hope you all have a lovely day.